Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am honored to introduce the governor of our great state of Montana, Governor Greg Gianforte. Governor Gianforte is a husband, father, grandfather, businessman, sportsman, and public servant. On November 3rd, 2020, he was elected Montana's 25th governor. Governor Gianforte was sworn in on January 4th, 2021. I ask that everyone please rise and that Governor Taylor and Lieutenant Governor Freitag please escort Governor Gianforte to the podium, please.
Good morning. Have a seat, please. So I've been looking forward to having this time with you for a little bit. I'm going to keep my comments really short, and then I want to hear what's on your mind. I want to congratulate you all first for participating in Boys State. This is incredibly instructive. I think so many of our leaders here in the state have come up through this program. I know I was just on the phone with Congressman Zinke. He and Senator Daines both came to Boys State, and I know many members of our legislature, and it's just a terrific program that's existed for 80 years. And do you know why it was created originally? To counter the growth of socialism in the United States, and to teach the principles of our government and to develop our young people, develop the next generation of leaders. I will also tell you that I am tremendously honored to serve as your governor, as the 25th governor of the state of Montana. I never thought I'd end up in public service. I'm an engineer by training. I studied electrical engineering. Anybody want to be an electrical engineer? Yeah, there you go. That's good. My wife is a mechanical engineer. And of our 4 kids, 3 of them are engineers. So we have a whole family of engineers because you'll find out the world is complicated and having engineering skills helps you figure it out. But I spent my whole career building companies, and we built a little business in Bozeman that became the town's largest commercial employer. We had 1,100 employees, half of which are in Bozeman and half were scattered around the world. And then that business was purchased, and I had to decide what to do. And I so love this state and this country that going into public service, I thought Montana wasn't really reaching its full potential. So I have focused on creating an environment where the private sector can create more good-paying jobs and also protecting our way of life. That's kind of my marching orders from the people of Montana. I've been in office just a couple of years after serving in Congress as Montana's lone member of Congress in the U.S. Congress, and I'm just thrilled you're all here. Who has the first question? Yes. Yeah, so how has my educational background affected me? Well, it's interesting. I did engineering work early in my career, and I learned that, as an engineer, 2 + 2 = 4. It always equals 4. But you put a human being in the equation, and you don't know what you're going to get out the other side. And the fact that any problem that includes human beings is always more complicated. And I really like that aspect, and it's what allowed me to grow the businesses that we did. And I've been able to apply all of those business skills and mostly management skills here in the state. To that end, what were some of those lessons? I think leadership is really four things. And I tend to make things more black and white than they can be because it helps an engineer simplify complex problems and makes it easier to make decisions. But the first aspect of leadership is you have to show up. And it was interesting, I got elected and then I got sworn in, and my second day in office, I was sitting here in the Capitol, and my team had been so busy with the inauguration, they hadn't actually put anything on my schedule for my second day of work. So I was bouncing around like a caged animal in the governor's office because I didn't have anything to do. So I said, well, following this first principle of leadership, I should go meet some people. I should show up. So I walked across the street from the Capitol here, went into the Department of Labor building, and I just went from office to office, and I said, hey, I'm Greg, and I just started across the street. What's your name and how long you been here? And I ran into a guy who said to me, you know, Governor, I've worked in this building for 29 years. It's 100 yards from the Capitol, and I've never seen a governor in this building. So that's why I go to all 56 counties every year. I'm currently in the middle of my 6th 56 county tour. So lesson number one is you got to show up, because otherwise you don't know what's going on. Second lesson of leadership is you have to hire well. Jim Collins, who's written on business and organizational structure, has always said that when you're trying to build an organization to do something, you have to consider the question who before you consider the question what are you going to go do. First who, then what. So one of the things I did when I came into office was I thought we needed a cultural change in state government to be more responsive to the people. So I replaced the leadership at every single agency in the state, and that helped then bring more cohesion, and it allowed us to implement this cultural change. So it's first show up, hire well, then you need real clarity of mission as a leader, because it's sort of like in the state, it was like we were putting 22 people on a football field, but we didn't tell them where the end zone was. And that made it really hard to score points. So we now have one-page strategic plans for each of all 13 agencies that I manage, and one for the governor's office. And we update them every 6 months. And there's a handful of initiatives on each one. And next to each initiative is someone's name. And next to that is a measure which is going to help us determine if we achieve that goal or not. So it's show up, hire well, bring clarity to mission, and then as you start accomplishing things, you got to celebrate the successes along the way. So when we catch people doing what we said we're going to do and achieving things, we'll go buy pizza or recognize somebody. And so that's kind of what I've learned and brought here. Who's next? Yes.
Starting off as a businessman, how did that beginning of your career transition into your political career?
So the transition from the private sector to the public sector. Again, I never thought I'd go into public service. But, you know, one door opens, another one closes. In total, I've started 5 different businesses, all in the technology space. And Senator Daines joined the company that we started in Bozeman, and we worked together for 12 years. And when Oracle came along and said they wanted to purchase our business, Steve was already making the transition to public service, and I saw him go. He's a chemical engineer, so he's the only chemical engineer in the U.S. Congress, either in the Senate or the House. They're a tough breed, chemical engineers. And I saw him make the transition, and I also thought about the blessings I had received through the system of government we have in this country and the individual freedoms we get to enjoy because of our Constitution. And I saw some of that slipping away. And I saw the regulatory environment we had in Montana and the tax system that was making Montana not as competitive as it could be. And when the business sold in 2012, somebody asked me, like, if you're not going to do it, who is? And I was in a position to do it, and I responded, and that's how I got over. And I found most of the business experience applies directly, particularly the organizational management and clear goal setting is directly applicable. Because how many employees do you think the state has? Anybody want to guess? Not quite, 11,000. So there's quite a bit of work involved in getting everybody rowing in the same direction. Next question. Yes? Well, good question. In my private sector career, I was always the president or the CEO of a company that I had started. And the executive branch, run by the governor, is like a CEO job. I ran for governor in 2016, and I lost to the then incumbent governor. And if you remember, shortly thereafter, Ryan Zinke got appointed as Secretary of Interior, so Montana had an open congressional seat. I never thought I'd go to Washington, except I just finished a statewide campaign. We had built name ID, and the party decided I was the logical person to go to Washington. A legislative position is very important. You get to vote on policy, but that's basically it. You say yes or no. You don't really have the ability to set agenda. So my professional background as a CEO of a company is better suited to the administration of government than it. But I will tell you, I don't regret my time in Washington at all. I learned a lot about the legislative process, just like you're going to learn about it in your time here. I have a much more higher respect for the deliberations to arrive at an effective outcome and make sure all voices get heard. So I think being in Congress, it makes me a better governor. Next question. Yeah. Very important. In fact, I think that we can be really proud. I really believe, and I say it often, that as Montanans, no matter what your political affiliation, we have more in common than separates us. That's why my wife and I entertain almost every night we're here in Helena. We have Democrats, we have Republicans, we have independents over, and we share a meal together. It's why I get out and travel to all the counties every year. And something you can be proud of, I don't have the numbers for the 2023 legislature yet, but in 2021, when I was governor, more than about 2/3 of all the pieces of legislation I signed into law had bipartisan support. And I will tell you, that doesn't happen in Washington. It's like shirts and skins back there all the time on most issues. But here, and this is something I've learned, when someone's passionate about something, it doesn't matter what the issue is, if you go back to the principle involved, you can often find common ground. I'll give you an example. Educational policy in K through 12 gets people pretty fired up because it involves our kids and how they're being raised. But the lens I use in K through 12 policy is, if we make this policy change, will it help more young people reach their full potential? Ultimately, that's the measure. And I don't know a Democrat or a Republican that doesn't agree with that. So if you can leave the vitriol out of the conversation and focus on the underlying issues, I find it's a lot easier to find common ground. And I signed bills this last session from Republicans and Democrats alike. If it was a good idea, I signed it into law. Yes?
What was your largest obstacle when you first got into politics, and how did you overcome it?
So the largest obstacle when I first got into politics, and how did I overcome it? Well, nobody knew who I was. And I'll tell you a secret. Do you know how you win elections? You get more votes than the other guy. If somebody doesn't know who you are, they can't vote for you. So the first thing I did was get on the road and go meet a lot of people. And I initially started a campaign to bring our kids back, because the 4 kids that we raised, my wife and I raised in Bozeman, 3 of them don't live in the state anymore. And as I get out and meet with people, I was running to implement a conservative policy related to taxes and regulation and personal freedoms. However, a lot of that stuff's very dry. The heart issue associated with not having a strong economy is the fact that our kids and grandkids don't live in the state anymore because we don't have enough jobs here. And if I'd have an audience this big in any community in Montana and ask them, how many of you have kids and grandkids that don't live here anymore? 100% of the hands go up. So I kicked off a 60-city tour with the Montana Chamber of Commerce to talk about how we bring our kids back. And that really spoke to the heart issues, and it gave me an opportunity to get to know the state at the same time. And that was during a period before I was ever running for office that gave me an opportunity to meet a lot of people. So I think it's really about name recognition, and you have to earn people's trust. And nobody cares what you think till they know that you care. So you have to go understand what they're wrestling with, and the issues are different in Glasgow or Big Timber or Kalispell or Polson or wherever you happen to be. Other questions? Yes, sir. Well, I'm proud of the fact that this last session we gave $1 billion back to taxpayers in both permanent tax relief and rebates. We had a large surplus because we had a conservative budget in 2021. We've been able to fix the state prison. We put a lot of money into mental health, which I think is a big deal, particularly bringing back community-based mental health. We doubled our rainy day fund, and we paid off all the state debt. So we're now completely debt-free as a state, which I think is huge. But the thing that really troubled me running for office was we have way too many kids in foster care in Montana. In fact, when I came into office, we had the second highest number of kids in foster care per capita than any other state in the country. Almost right around 4,000 kids in Montana in foster care. And by working with public-private partnerships and helping to strengthen families, again with public-private partnerships, just in 2 years, we've been able to reduce the number of kids in Montana foster care by about 1,500 by getting them into permanent homes. So we're now at about 2,500. And I think in terms of long-term impact, we can have debates about tax rates and regulations and all this stuff. But in terms of affecting positive outcomes for Montanans, that's one of the things I'm most proud of. Yeah. What's the one thing I would have wanted to have known coming in here? I'm not sure. A couple of things surprised me pleasantly. I did that walk around the second day in the office at Labor. I now do 2 walk-arounds in every agency every year. So it's a chance to meet. And I am continually impressed with the caliber of state workers that we have and their dedication. But one of the things I've learned in business, I think it's generally true, any organization without a clear vision of what their purpose is tends to focus on themselves. So if someone's aggressive, they try and build an empire. And if they're more passive, they work on self-preservation. And neither one lends to an effective organization. So that's why clarity of mission is so important in helping people understand what is the greater purpose in their work. so that they can have a sense of pride in the work product and feel part of a team. And I'm sure many of you have played sports. There's a common sense of purpose. You got to put the football in the end zone. You got to put the basketball in the hoop, and that's how you win games. Well, when if you went on a basketball court and nobody knew you were supposed to put the basketball in the hoop, what would you focus on? And that's what was happening in state government. So that was a surprise to me, but the caliber of the people was very high. Yes?
So earlier you said that Montana is now an entirely debt-free state. Why exactly is that super important?
Yeah, why is being debt-free a good thing? The debt that Montana had, first I'll say, it wasn't as excessive as what we have at a national level. But debt is a master that requires attention, because especially in the current environment where we're seeing increasing interest rates, a large debt start to consume resources that could be used for other purposes, whether it's education or fixing our roads or expanding mental health services or lowering the tax burden. I'll leave it up to the legislature to debate which one you want to spend the money on. But eliminating the debt for the state of Montana eliminated about $40 million in expenses over the next 2 years. And that's $40 million that we can put into other things in the state, and we don't have that burden anymore. Yes? So what are some traits that good leaders have? I'm a big fan. I mentioned Jim Collins. If you want to learn about leadership, I think his book, Good to Great, is probably one of the best books ever written. I'll give you a little bit of background on the book. It's very easy to read, but Jim Collins studied public companies over a long period of time, and he wanted to figure out what allowed organizations to perform at an exceptional level. And what was it that allowed companies to go from good performance to great performance? And he looked across thousands of companies, and he identified just a handful of companies that had made this transition from good to great and then sustained it over the long term. And it turns out that, and then he compared it with other companies that maybe were good but never got to great. And he spent, I think it was 7 years, interviewing the management teams at all these companies. And he uncovered a series of traits that existed in all the companies that went from good to great. And those same exact traits were not present in the ones that were good but never got to great. And they were things, I've mentioned a number of them. They tended to hire well. They had something called a hedgehog, which is the thing they did better than anybody else. They tended to promote from within. They developed their next generation of leaders. They were always investing in people. And there's like 7 of these traits. And that's been a model for me in my leadership. And if you're interested in leadership stuff, I would encourage you to read the book. Yes? Good question. What's the most useful piece of wisdom I've achieved? This was a hard lesson for me. I care a lot about whatever I do, whether I'm fishing, hunting, state government, whatever it is. And I used to get very frustrated with myself because I couldn't always control the outcome. And the realization for me that that's not where I should be focused. I have to focus on things I can control. And there's really 2 of them. I can control my attitude, and I can control how hard I work. But if your sense of identity is focused on the outcome of your work, and that's something you can't control, you're going to end up being very frustrated with life. So I would just encourage you to focus on your attitude and your work ethic. And if you get to the end of the day and you have a pile of good stuff that you achieved, that's great. But there are going to be days where you bust your hiney and end up with nothing in the pile. And you got to feel good about those days too. In fact, I did a TEDx video on this. And if you have interest in going further, you can Google my last name, TEDx Bozeman. It's like a 6-minute video on how to find satisfaction in work and life. And it talks about some of these concepts. Yes?
So as a governor, how often do you go to Washington, D.C.? And when you do go, what are the reasons?
Yeah, so the question is, how often do I go to Washington, D.C.? When I was congressman, I was there every week. I'm proud to say I didn't spend a single weekend in Washington, D.C. in 3.5 years. We came back to Montana every weekend. I am thankful now I don't have to go there very often. I'm always firing off letters to them. I'm generally there. There's a national governor's conference every January or February. So I'm typically back in Washington, D.C. once a year. Yes?
From Augusta, what industry needs more leaders to help boost that part of the economy?
Yeah. So the question is, what industry needs more leaders? I would say all industries. But again, this gets to the purpose of government and what should government be doing. Does anybody want to offer one of the reasons why government exists? Yes. And I'll give you a hint. There's 4. So one of the reasons for government, you're correct, is to make and enforce the laws. So we will probably agree that murder is wrong. If you commit a murder, you're probably going to end up in jail. All right. But we have to be careful about how far we go. Should we be regulating what people eat or don't eat? So there's a limit to that. So one is to make and enforce the laws. What's another reason for government? Well, that would be make and enforce laws. You're right. Yes.
Defend the country.
Yeah, absolutely right. So another reason for government is national defense. Okay, so make and enforce the laws, national defense. What would be a third reason for government? Yes.
To help boost the economy?
Government certainly has a role in creating a climate for the economy to succeed, but it is in more authoritarian governments that actually try and manage the economy. So that's not a real conservative view. I'll tell you, the third one is infrastructure that can't be paid for in any other way. So think about our interstate system, water and sewer systems in your local community. It'd be very hard to do that in the private sector. And those 3 were originally introduced by Adam Smith in his book, Wealth of Nations. And then in the middle part of last century, particularly in the Great Society, a 4th one was added, which historically had been handled by churches and community-based groups and families. That is a social safety net for people that kind of fall on hard times. That's like food stamps, Social Security, welfare checks, these sorts of things. But ultimately, those are the 4 purposes of government. We do have a role in having a competitive tax policy so that entrepreneurs can keep the fruits of their labor and reasonable wages can be paid, and we have a safe workplace. But I don't think it's government's job to pick winners and losers in industries. There is no industry that will not benefit, however, from better leadership. So I would encourage you to work on your leadership skills and then follow your passion wherever they take you.
Mr. Governor,
yeah.
If you have a last statement, we need to get you on to your next assignment.
Okay. Thank you for investing in yourself. Boys State, you will carry with it the rest of your life. And I just congratulate you on that, and I wish you the best, and know that my door is always open. Thank you for being here.
All rise.